At family dinner, my mom looked straight at my fiancé and said, "Tell him who you were with last night." The room exploded. Family dinners had always been loud in my parents' house, but that particular evening carried a different kind of tension. The smell of roasted chicken and baked potatoes filled the dining room. The table was set with polished cutlery, and candles flickered in the center as if my mother wanted to mark the occasion as something special. My father was in his usual seat at the head of the table, cutting bread and passing it around. My younger sister scrolled on her phone until my mother scolded her to put it away. And next to me sat my fiancé, dressed elegantly, smiling as though nothing could disturb the calm. But beneath the surface, there was unease. My mother barely looked at her. She kept her voice polite but clipped, asking about work, about the apartment we were planning to move into, about the wedding details. The questions were pointed, not warm. My fiancé answered them all with confidence, occasionally glancing at me for support. I thought at first my mother was just being overprotective, unwilling to hand her son over to another woman. Parents sometimes had a hard time with that. The meal went on quietly, forks scraping plates, occasional laughter from my father when he tried to lighten the mood. My fiancé touched my hand under the table, a reassuring squeeze as though to say she wasn't afraid of my mother's sharp tone. I took it as a good sign, that she was strong enough to stand her ground. Halfway through the meal, my mother suddenly set her fork down, folded her hands on the table, and stared straight at my fiancé. Her voice was calm but cutting, the kind that froze everyone in place. She told her to explain who she had been with last night. The words dropped into the silence like a hammer. My fork nearly slipped from my hand. My sister looked up from her plate wide-eyed. My father muttered something under his breath, probably hoping to defuse things, but the damage was done. My fiancé blinked, stunned for a moment, then composed herself with almost theatrical grace. She asked what exactly my mother was insinuating. Her tone carried outrage, but also an underlying calculation, as if she had rehearsed this kind of denial before. My mother didn't flinch. She said she saw her with someone else. The tension exploded. My fiancé's chair scraped back as she leaned forward, voice rising, insisting it wasn't true. She said she had been working late, that my mother was inventing things because she had never truly accepted her. She painted a picture of being unfairly judged, of being constantly measured and criticized. She even claimed my mother had disliked her from the very beginning and now was trying to poison the relationship between us. I felt caught between two worlds, the woman I loved and the woman who raised me. My mother's glare was unwavering, and I could tell she was certain of what she saw. But my fiancé's defense was so passionate, so detailed, that doubt took root in my mind. She reminded me of how often my mother had made small remarks about her clothes, her family background, even the way she handled herself socially. It was true. My mother was rarely satisfied. The argument turned personal. My fiancé accused my mother of jealousy, of trying to keep me tethered to her side forever. She said it wasn't about truth, it was about control. Every word sharpened the wedge between them. My father tried to calm things, raising his hands, telling them both to stop. But once unleashed, there was no way to contain the fury in that room. Finally, my fiancé stood up, her face flushed, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and injured pride. She said she wouldn't sit at a table where she was treated like a criminal. She insisted she had done nothing wrong, and if I believed otherwise, then I didn't trust her at all. With that, she left the dining room, heels clicking against the floor as she stormed out of the house. The silence that followed was deafening. My father sighed heavily, my sister stared at her plate, and my mother looked at me with that same cold certainty. She told me not to let myself be blind, that sometimes love made us refuse to see what was right in front of us. But I was furious. My loyalty had shifted instinctively to the woman I planned to marry. I stood up, heart pounding, and told my mother she had gone too far. I said she had humiliated my fiancé without proof, turning a family dinner into a courtroom. My father tried to calm me, but I was already raising my voice, demanding why she couldn't support me instead of constantly criticizing the person I loved. My mother shot back that she was protecting me, that she wasn't going to sit silently while I was deceived. The words stung, and I couldn't bear the implication. To me, it felt like she wanted to control my life, to undermine my choices, to drive a wedge into my relationship. I stormed out too, leaving my parents sitting at that dinner table, the candles still flickering as if mocking the wreckage of the evening. Outside, my fiancée was waiting by the car, wiping her eyes. She told me she had tried to be patient, that she had wanted so badly to be accepted, but no matter what she did, my mother would always find a reason to hate her. She asked if I trusted her. And in that moment, filled with anger at my mother and a desire to defend the woman I had chosen, I said yes. I told her my mother had gone too far. That night, Lying in bed beside her, I replayed the dinner in my head. Part of me was unsettled by how confident my mother had sounded, but I pushed it away. Love makes people blind to warning signs, and I was determined to prove my loyalty to my fiancé. I told myself my mother was simply protective, maybe even controlling, unwilling to let me go. I convinced myself that was the truth, because the alternative, that my mother might actually be right, was too painful to accept. Yet, deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. The days after the dinner stretched out in uneasy silence. I avoided visiting my parents' house, answering my mother's calls with short replies, sometimes ignoring them altogether. My fiancée noticed, of course, and acted hurt when I told her I wasn't ready to face another confrontation. She said it was better if we kept some distance from my mother until things cooled down. At the time, that sounded reasonable. After all, I had chosen to side with her, and crossing back would have made me look weak. On the surface, everything between us seemed fine. She went to work as usual, we cooked together in the evenings, and we even spent time planning details for the wedding. But beneath the routine, something gnawed at me. Her laugh felt slightly forced, her explanations about her schedule rehearsed. I wanted to believe her, but I kept replaying the way my mother had looked across the table, sharp-eyed and certain. My fiancé's passionate denial had silenced me at the dinner, but now, in the quiet moments, it rang like a performance. The first crack appeared one Thursday night. She told me she had to stay late at work because a colleague needed her help preparing a presentation. She left with her laptop bag and kissed me on the cheek before heading out. I tried not to think too much about it, but hours passed, and when I texted her around 10, she didn't answer. She finally came home near midnight, apologizing, saying she had left her phone in her bag and hadn't noticed the messages. She looked tired but oddly restless, as if adrenaline still pulsed through her veins. I asked about the project, and she rattled off some vague details about figures and charts, never naming the colleague. The next morning, as she showered, I noticed her work bag left on the table. I wasn't in the habit of checking her things, but my eyes caught on a receipt sticking out of the side pocket. I pulled it free. It was from a small Italian restaurant across town, time-stamped for 9:37 p.m., the exact time she had supposedly been buried in spreadsheets. My stomach tightened. When she came out of the bathroom, I slid the receipt back without saying anything, but the seed of suspicion grew roots. A few days later, another inconsistency surfaced. She mentioned in passing that she had been exhausted after working late on Monday, but I clearly remembered Monday night. She had told me she was home early because a client canceled. When I pointed this out lightly, she laughed it off, saying she had mixed up the days. It could have been an innocent slip, but once doubt creeps in, every detail starts to look suspicious. That weekend, while she was out running errands, my phone buzzed with an email notification from our joint credit card account. I had never bothered to check those closely before, but curiosity pulled me in. Scrolling through the recent transactions, one entry froze me. A hotel charge, midweek, downtown. Not the kind of hotel you book for travel, but one known locally for discretion. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the screen, my heart pounding. She had never mentioned staying in a hotel, and there was no legitimate reason for it. When she came back later with groceries, I tried to keep my face calm. I asked casually if she had ever used the card for work expenses. She said no, her company reimbursed everything directly. I nodded, hiding the storm inside me. I didn't confront her then, partly because I wanted to be certain, partly because I feared hearing her deny it convincingly again. That night, lying in bed next to her, the realization pressed on me like a weight. My mother's accusation wasn't random. She had seen something. Maybe she hadn't been exaggerating or malicious. Maybe she had been trying to warn me. The anger I had felt toward her at the dinner began to shift into something else, shame. I had defended the wrong person, but suspicion alone wasn't enough. I needed proof that couldn't be explained away with clever words. So I decided to start paying closer attention. I wasn't a detective, but I could observe. The first step was simple. I began noting her comings and goings, writing them down in my phone under a disguised file. Small details, when she left, when she returned, what excuse she gave. Within a week, a pattern started to emerge. Her late nights always fell on the same 2 days. Her explanations shifted between helping colleagues and meeting clients, but never the same story twice. One evening, after she said she had to run out for groceries, I decided to test it. I waited 5 minutes, then drove after her. She didn't go to the supermarket near our apartment. Instead, she drove across town, parking outside a cafe. Through the windshield, I watched as she stepped out and checked her phone nervously. A man walked up to her, someone I didn't recognize, and they greeted each other with a familiarity that tightened my chest. They didn't kiss, not openly, but their closeness was unmistakable. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, torn between storming inside and demanding answers or holding back. My anger burned, but a voice inside urged me to stay quiet. If I confronted her now, she would deny, twist, and maybe even convince me I was paranoid. If I waited, I could gather something undeniable. I drove away, my hands trembling on the wheel. That night, she came home with a bag of groceries, smiling as if nothing had happened. She cooked pasta, asked me about my day, leaned against me on the couch. I nodded and pretended, but inside, everything had shifted. Over the next week, I became more deliberate. I checked her phone bills, cross-referencing the unknown numbers. One in particular appeared often, always during her supposed late nights. I saved it, then called it from my own phone one morning while she was in the shower. A man's voice answered, groggy, unfamiliar. I hung up without speaking. The truth was closing in, no longer just suspicion but a web of evidence tightening around her. I couldn't bring myself to confront her outright yet. I wanted her to trap herself. I wanted her lies to collapse under their own weight. Then came the turning point. One Friday evening, she told me she was meeting coworkers for a casual dinner. I smiled, kissed her cheek, and wished her fun. But instead of staying home, I followed from a distance. She drove not to a restaurant full of colleagues, but to a quiet street on the other side of the city. I parked far enough to avoid notice and watched as she got out, glancing around before walking into an apartment building. I waited, heart hammering, until the lights of a second-floor window flicked on. A silhouette joined hers, a man's shape unmistakable even through the curtain. They lingered close, too close to be explained away. That was the moment denial shattered completely. My mother had been right all along. I had turned against her for nothing. I had defended someone who was betraying me in the most calculated way. I sat in the car for a long time, rage mixing with a cold determination. Confronting her in private would not be enough. She would find a way to spin it, to wriggle free. No, she needed to be exposed, stripped of excuses, revealed for what she truly was. The beginnings of a plan took shape that night. I didn't yet know exactly how I would execute it, but one thing was clear: her downfall would not be quick or quiet. It would be deliberate, undeniable, and final. After that Friday night, I stopped pretending everything was normal. Outwardly, I kept my composure, going through the motions of daily life. But inside, something hardened. I wasn't simply betrayed. I had been made into a fool in front of my family. My mother had tried to protect me, and I had turned on her. That humiliation was a heavier weight than the betrayal itself. But anger without patience would ruin everything. If I confronted her too soon, she would deny, cry, twist the story. I needed to build a case so airtight that not even her most convincing performance could escape it. That meant thinking carefully, acting silently, and keeping my rage buried under a mask of calm. The first step was information. I began watching her routines like a hawk. On the days she claimed to be working late, I created excuses to be out myself, then circled back quietly. Twice more, I caught her slipping away to the same apartment building. The man always let her in within minutes. The pattern was clear. I didn't want only my eyes as evidence. So, one afternoon, while she showered, I slipped her phone from the counter and scrolled through her recent calls. The mysterious number I had already identified was there, called daily, sometimes multiple times a day. In the message log, she had been careful, nothing explicit remained. But a small oversight betrayed her, a calendar reminder she had forgotten to delete. It was set for a meeting, but the location matched the street of that apartment building. I screenshotted it, emailed it to myself, then deleted the history. I wasn't ready to show it yet, but every piece mattered. At the same time, I started pulling away emotionally. When she spoke about the wedding, I nodded but didn't contribute. When she tried to cuddle on the couch, I offered excuses about being tired. She noticed, of course, and asked if something was wrong. I told her work stress, nothing more. She accepted it, probably because she was distracted by her double life. The turning point came when I decided to set a deliberate trap. I told her I had a work trip scheduled out of town, leaving Friday afternoon and returning Sunday. I packed a bag, let her watch me load it into the car, kissed her goodbye, and drove off. But instead of heading to the highway, I parked near a friend's house across the city and waited. That night, as expected, she didn't stay home alone. She dressed carefully, slipped out, and drove straight to that same apartment building. I followed at a distance, heart pounding but steady. She entered just before 9, staying until after midnight. I didn't confront her then. Instead, I recorded the time, the address, and the fact that she stayed for hours. The next morning, I drove past the building again and noted the car parked outside. His car, I assumed, from the unfamiliar plates. It was a small detail, but it would matter. On Sunday evening, I returned home as though nothing had happened. She greeted me warmly, asked about my trip, and cooked dinner. I watched her laugh and talk, her eyes bright, her hands gesturing animatedly, and I felt a cold detachment settle over me. She was good at pretending. Too good. But soon she would learn what it felt like when the mask was torn away. The following week, I began preparing the second phase of my plan. I reached out to a mutual acquaintance who worked at the same office as her. Casually, I asked if he knew the man whose number I had traced. He did. A coworker, someone who had joined the company recently, known for being charming and reckless. The puzzle clicked into place. She hadn't met him randomly. She had brought him out of her professional life into ours. I couldn't stop myself from digging further. I drove by the office once, waiting until late evening. Around 10, the lights flicked off, and I saw them emerge together, laughing as they walked toward the parking lot. She glanced around nervously, then leaned close to him, their hands brushing as they parted. My chest burned, but I stayed silent, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. By then, I had all the evidence I needed in my mind, but I wanted more than a private confrontation. I wanted a reckoning she couldn't escape from. The plan crystallized. I would let her reveal herself in front of everyone who mattered. No denials, no turning the tables, no painting herself as the victim. The truth would stand bare, undeniable, and devastating. To make that possible, I needed to coordinate the moment. I quietly spoke to my father, not telling him everything but asking him to host another family dinner, insisting it would help mend the rift between my fiancée and my mother. He agreed, though with hesitation. My mother, still wounded from the last confrontation, was reluctant, but she finally said yes when I told her I wanted to rebuild peace. My fiancée was thrilled at the idea, seeing it as proof that I was choosing her side fully. She promised to be gracious, to show she could handle my mother's sharpness with dignity. I nodded, hiding the anticipation behind my eyes. Meanwhile, I prepared the final piece. On the night of my supposed business trip, I had left a small recording device in the glove compartment of her car. It wasn't sophisticated, but it worked. It had captured muffled conversations, laughter, intimate tones, even a fragment where she mentioned my name with a cruel edge, mocking how easily I believed her excuses. Listening to it felt like being stabbed repeatedly, but it also steeled my resolve. That recording would be my hammer. The night of the dinner arrived. I dressed calmly, my movements measured. She looked radiant, carefully styled, wearing the necklace I had given her months earlier. She smiled at me, unaware of the storm about to break. On the drive over, she spoke optimistically about how this dinner would change everything, how my mother would finally see her worth, how peace would return. I let her talk, nodding at intervals, my mind already fixed on what was about to unfold. When we entered my parents' house, the atmosphere was tense but civil. My father poured wine, my sister helped set dishes, and my mother greeted us with cool politeness. The table was heavy with food again, but no one reached for it immediately. Conversation stumbled along, awkward but controlled. I waited, letting her speak, letting her laugh, letting her pretend. Every word was another layer of the mask she wore, and I knew soon it would crack. As dessert was set down, I pulled out my phone, placed it on the table, and pressed play. The recording filled the silence, her voice, unmistakable, laughing with another man, mocking me. The sound of him responding, their closeness clear even without explicit words. The room froze. My fiancée's face drained of color, her mouth opening, but no words forming. My mother's eyes gleamed with vindication, my father's expression hardened, and my sister gasped audibly. She tried to speak then, scrambling for explanations, but the recording cut through every denial. Her hands trembled as she reached toward me, pleading with her eyes. But I leaned back, watching her unravel. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt calm. The mask had shattered. Everyone could see the truth. And this was only the beginning. The recording played on, each muffled laugh and intimate tone striking like a nail into the coffin of her excuses. My fiancée's face twisted between disbelief and desperation. She kept insisting it wasn't what it sounded like, that context was missing, that it had been a joke. But every time her voice from the recording echoed in the dining room, mocking me for being naive, her defenses collapsed further. The silence at the table was heavy, broken only by the occasional clink of silverware as someone shifted uncomfortably. My father leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on her. My mother didn't gloat openly, but her expression carried the satisfaction of truth revealed. My sister looked between us, horrified, almost pitying me. I let the recording end, then locked my phone and set it down slowly. My fiancée reached across the table, her hand trembling, as though touching me might tether her back to safety. But I didn't move. I kept my eyes on her, calm, cold, unflinching. She launched into a new performance, claiming it had been harmless fun with a colleague, that nothing physical had ever happened, that my mother's hatred had forced her into reckless behavior. Her words tumbled fast, desperate, incoherent at times. She pleaded with me to remember the years we had spent together, the wedding we were planning, the love we had built. She tried to wrap herself in the past as a shield, but the shield was made of paper, and I was holding fire. I didn't argue with her. I didn't yell or accuse. I simply reached into my jacket and placed a slim folder on the table. Inside were printed screenshots of the credit card charges at the hotel, the receipt from the restaurant, the calendar entry she had forgotten to delete. Every piece of evidence laid bare, side by side, impossible to refute. She stared at them, her lips parting, her breath catching. She reached for the papers, flipping through them frantically, as if some explanation might appear. But there was none. She knew it, and so did everyone else in that room. The weight of silence pressed down again. My father finally broke it, his voice low but steady, asking if she had anything to say. She didn't answer. She dropped the papers onto the table, buried her face in her hands, and shook her head. That was when I stood. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed back my chair and looked at her one last time. The anger in me was cold now, refined, sharpened into a single point. I told her it was over. That every plan, every promise, every future we had imagined together was finished. I told her she had betrayed not just me, but my family, dragging them into lies that I had defended at their expense. Her voice cracked as she begged for forgiveness, saying she had made mistakes, that she had been confused, that she still loved me. But her words were hollow echoes against the mountain of evidence. She reached for my hand again, but I pulled back, letting the space between us stretch like a canyon. Then I delivered the final strike. I told her she had until the end of the week to move her things out of the apartment. I had already canceled the wedding venue, the honeymoon bookings, and every deposit tied to our future. The joint accounts were closed. The lease on the apartment was in my name only. She was walking away with nothing but her own belongings. Her eyes widened with shock, then fury. She accused me of cruelty, of orchestrating her downfall. She tried to twist it, to paint herself as the victim of a vindictive man and a meddling mother. But no one at the table believed her. My father told her she should leave before the situation grew uglier. She stood shakily, tears streaking her makeup, muttering under her breath about how unfair it all was. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost cleansing. I sat back down slowly, exhaustion washing over me. My hands trembled slightly, but not from doubt, from the release of holding everything inside for so long. My mother's gaze met mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said the words I had resisted for weeks. I told her she had been right, that I should have trusted her from the beginning, that I was sorry for doubting her, for defending someone who didn't deserve it. Her expression softened. She reached across the table, not with triumph, but with quiet forgiveness, and placed her hand over mine. She said she only wanted me to see the truth, even if it hurt. I nodded, the weight of shame pressing heavy, but lighter than before. The rest of the evening passed in muted conversation. My sister asked gentle questions, my father poured another round of wine, and the topic slowly shifted away from the wreckage of my engagement. But beneath it all, the wound remained raw. Over the next days, the consequences unfolded. My fiancée tried to contact me dozens of times, calls, texts, emails. I ignored them all. She showed up once at the apartment, banging on the door, begging me to let her explain. I told her through the closed door that there was nothing left to say. Eventually, she left, her sobs echoing down the hallway. I learned later from mutual acquaintances that the affair with her coworker had collapsed quickly once exposed. He wanted no part in the drama, no connection to the fallout. He stopped answering her messages, leaving her alone in the ruins she had built. At work, rumors spread fast, and her reputation suffered. Projects were taken from her, colleagues avoided her, and within months, she quietly resigned. Meanwhile, I slowly rebuilt the bridges I had burned with my family. My mother welcomed me back without conditions, though I could see the relief in her eyes that I had finally seen the truth. My father supported me in handling the canceled wedding logistics, and my sister checked in often to make sure I wasn't drowning in bitterness. It wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake replaying everything, wondering how I could have been so blind, how I could have turned against the one person who had tried to warn me. But those thoughts hardened into resolve. Betrayal had taught me more about loyalty than anything else ever could. The cruel revenge I had executed, stripping her of the future she thought she controlled, exposing her lies in front of everyone, didn't erase the pain. But it restored something more important, my dignity. I hadn't just been a victim, I had taken back control. Months later, when I finally packed away the last remnants of the wedding that would never happen, the unused invitations, the receipt stubs, the ring she had left behind in desperation, I felt a strange peace. The storm had passed. The scars remained, but they no longer bled. And when I visited my parents again for Sunday dinner, my mother greeted me with a warm smile. The same table where the world had cracked open for me months earlier now felt whole again. She didn't mention the past. She didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer heavy with doubt, but light with understanding. I had made my mistake. I had paid for it. And I had made sure the one who betrayed me paid even more. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.